managing innovation. And I think there are times when that is absolutely necessary, and there are times when you need to move away from that and do become more agile and free thinking. And then you have to move back again to thinking in a more controlled and constrained way. So I think probably both are needed for effective innovation. The point about it being systemic.
Can I just butt in 1 second? It's Steve. Does anybody have a problem with us recording this session? I think that would be a good idea for anybody who wants to watch it back.
Oh.
Please shout if you have an issue with that, but I won't. But if no one has an issue with it, I'll record.
Okay. Shall I go again?
We won't start from the very beginning, though.
No, I'll pick up. I'll pick up on the systemic point.
Fine. No, please continue.
Yeah. Okay. Picking up on that systemic point, then, it's really important that you can manage to integrate all the various factors that you really need to pay attention to when you're developing an innovative technology or system. You know, there are a lot of factors that will all be interacting with one another, and you have to understand these interactions. If you focus narrowly on one thing, you'll make mistakes. And you'll have repercussions hitting you unexpectedly from other areas. One of the early systemic thinkers, an American called Rasakov, he said that if you don't adopt a systemic approach, you run the risk of being very precisely wrong. And you'll be doing some detailed analysis in one corner of the area you should be paying attention to, and you'll forget the rest and you'll get it wrong. Legitimacy, it gives you legitimacy if you have a standard behind you. It provides you with a shared language. There is less waste on failed innovation. If you're less likely to fail, then you're less likely to waste the money that you've spent up until a particular stage of development, and there's less waste overall in your system and in the whole state system as well. There's often a question of a first mover disadvantage. You often have a situation where everybody knows that something positive needs to be done to improve the prospects for an innovative technology, but there's no incentive to be the first mover. And a consensus standard allows everybody to move together with no competitive disadvantage between them, and that can work very well in the earlier stages of developing innovative technologies. I'll talk a little bit later about demonstrating responsibility, and that's the PAS 440, the BSI standard. And it's not just enough to be responsible. You do have to demonstrate. You have to be able to demonstrate at the drop of a hat, if you're challenged, that you've been responsible in the way you've innovated your technology. Supply chain and ecosystem collaboration is much easier if there are common standards that everyone has to comply with, and their strategic national value through standards. A thriving innovation standards environment will contribute to what we're calling the UK's national quality infrastructure. That's a formal development in the UK government. It's seen as facilitating trading relationships and attracting companies to locate in the UK and supporting the UK economy. So it's really important for the economy as well as just for companies and for institutes like EDGE.
Yes. One of the things that you mentioned there, that's on that list there, legitimacy. I just wanted to touch on that's coming out of some of the latest research on the implementation of ISO 56002 and how having something like an ISO standard for innovation management helps to manage some of those individuals within the system who try to go above a process which is designed to ensure that you cover off and look at prioritizing your uncertainties and addressing those uncertainties and ensuring that you have really good quality outcomes and that you minimize those uncertainties as soon as possible within the process. But just by having that, sometimes just by having that title of ISO, Innovation Management System, we're seeing that the research that's being actually worked on at the moment is discovering this key legitimacy quality, which is quite an interesting one to bear in mind. But what I'm going to chat to you now about is a little bit about the ABC of standards. So those of you who might not be that okay with them, effectively, the standards work on the PDCA, the Plan, Do, Check, Act model, which is just really about making sure that you are following a continuous improvement process all the way through. So at the very base of almost any of the management standards, you are always going to see the Plan, Do, Check, Act. It's the little cheat sheet of how they're designed. So, but just generally with regards to what standards are about, I think one of the most important things to note here, over and above kind of some of the basics of what standards are all about, is that the management standards, so 9001, 14001, some of those, those big seminal pieces of standardization all have the same basic structure now. So it's called a harmonized, the harmonized high-level structure within standards, which means that if you already apply one of them, or if you have some understanding of standards, they become very easy to not only understand and follow, but to bolt onto your existing program. So back to that systemic point earlier, if you know standards at all, they lock in to every aspect, from leadership, management, all the way through to how you operationalize each function. And I've personally found that for the first time, you find those people responsible for compliance and for process within organizations getting excited about innovation, because they can now see how they can make this all work for them. But primarily, what we also want you to be aware of here is that there are two types of standards, and I briefly touched on it earlier. Whenever you see a number followed by a 001, what that is that's the requirement standard. That's the one that's auditable, so 9001. But what you would find underneath each standard is then a whole lot of additional guides, which I think somebody's got a bit of noise coming in, background noise there. But you then have a whole lot of guides, which are expertly written guidances to help you to put in place these code of practices of how to put in place and how to address some of these key issues. So we call them informative or non-prescriptive. And we'll be talking about PAS 440, which falls into the non-prescriptive category. And in fact, everything we're talking to you about today is non-prescriptive, because we're in the development of 56001 at the moment, so it hasn't yet come to market. And that kind of takes me on to where we are in this process. So what occurred almost 10 years ago is that the Central European standards body, CEN, asked countries if they could potentially develop an innovation management standard. And at the time, many countries believed that it wasn't possible. And so the discussion began to say, well, let's bring everybody together. Let's start to develop a community view on this. Let's start to actually look at this technology. And this is just how all standards get developed. But in this case, with innovation management, we began to go through this process whereby the request really began with, how can we improve the overall quality of innovation, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises who are potentially getting government grants and government funding. So it was actually directly linked to this requirement to be able to assess the quality of the management of innovation within firms in order to confirm whether or not they would be best suited for grants, and in order to support the right type of organizations taking forward innovation investment at a state level. So that's where the conversation started. And our pool of members for the committee who is responsible for this it's over 184 experts from around the world. And over the last 10 years, they have been developing all of what they believe are the key domains and the key areas where we need to fully understand what the requirements would be for an innovation management system in order to build up to the point where we've now got to 56002, which is probably the fullest version of recommendations, so that we can then begin to develop the first global auditable innovation management system standard, which will be 56001, which will launch in Q1 2024. So that gives you a sense of what's being developed, and we'll go into more detail as to what sits under that chapter, that title of 56,000 a little bit later as we move through. But for you to get an idea of the principles that have been developed, which kind of overarchingly sit behind 56,000 and other innovation management standards, is first of all the realization of value. This isn't about idea management solely. This isn't about invention and R&D. It's fundamentally about the realization of value. So it's the unsexy bit where you actually have to take whatever the product is to market, or the service, or whatever type of innovation it might be. It might be in a social environment too. It doesn't necessarily mean commercialization, but that realization of value. And that I'm going to touch on 8 right now, but systems approach, because it incorporates leadership and the type of leadership that's required. It incorporates strategy and the strategic direction required, and how that applies to and should be reflected in the culture of the organization. So very much this is at a systemic level. It is, of course, about exploiting, and we say insights here, but it's about identifying opportunities and being able to exploit those using insights in order to create concepts and to begin that process of ideation all the way through to realized value. And along the way, it is about managing uncertainty, prioritizing those uncertainties and being able to minimize those uncertainties so that you know that what you are producing is going to be successful. Adaptable structures, and often the term there is openness, but it's a certain type of adaptability that's required in order to be able to create the right environment for that ideation early on, but also to have the right type of protocols and process to manage the delivery of value. So being able to adapt at the right time with the right competencies and resource as we go through. Yes, and knowledge management, and particularly IP and open innovation, is covered, and I will specifically point those out to you shortly. I can't actually see your name on there, it's just initials, AJ, so I will mention that as we go through. Abrar, thank you. Portfolio, this is the scope of innovation management standards. Really, they can touch on anything that experts within innovation management feel strongly enough about, I suppose, but also have done their research, have had to propose it at a national level and then at an international level, and then be balloted, and then to begin to develop that particular guidance around that piece of work, which goes through multiple stages of peer review. So your average standard will have been through at least 4 stages of peer review before getting to a final document, final draft, as we call it. So that's given you a breakneck speed tour through what the ABCs of standards are all about, and a little bit about what innovation management standards and innovation standards are about. At this point, does anybody else have any questions or any points that they'd like answered? That I'm going to take that as a good sign from all of you. What we'll do now is start to go into a little bit more detail about these specific standards that we have here, specifically PAS 440, which Joyce is going to chat us through. And then I will go into a little bit more detail. And I think it was Richard early on who asked about, who wanted to know a little bit more about, the bureaucracy. What should you take and what shouldn't you take from 56002? And we'll cover that off, and how to make it a lot more simpler and more streamlined, specifically as EDGE specialists, for what you need to then share to the startups and the SMEs that you support. We'll also touch on those frameworks, Andrew, about tracking your ideas and that sort of thing all the way through, which touches on that knowledge management piece too. So we're going to move on to our next section, and I'm going to hand over to Joyce now, who will have to tell me to move on the slides every now and then. So okay. So she'll do that when required.
Well, thanks very much, Victoria. I don't know if anybody noticed, but I lost my connection, and I've only just rejoined you, just in time.
Oh, good.
So thank you very much. Anyway, just a little bit of background explanation. I was the technical author of PAS 440, along with a great deal of help from Paul Mason of Innovate UK, who some of you may know, and it's a very enjoyable experience. I really enjoyed collaborating with Paul. It was very stimulating. So we're suggesting that you can define responsible innovation as the careful consideration of and action to address the potential impacts of introducing a new product, service or process or business model. And I should add to that we really don't think you need to go through a complex process of responsible innovation if your innovation is merely incremental. If it's only going to make a small change to your current production systems, making you able to do them faster, slightly cheaper, but nothing major has changed, I don't think that requires a responsible innovation approach. It's for innovations that are disruptive or transformative and are likely to attract public attention particularly, but not necessarily. And this is also been stimulated by a fairly widespread demand from public stakeholders, and also recognition from companies that times have changed and that the public and your potential collaborators in value chains and so on are increasingly going to be looking for evidence from you that you are being responsible in the way you're developing your innovation product. The impacts you're looking at are the kinds of things that can be important for the company itself, the innovating company, their customers and suppliers, their investors, and the wider society and environment. And this PAS 440 has actually had a spectacular number of downloads. I think it had over 1,000 on the first day of its launch, which was a record for any standard ever funded by Innovate UK. And it's now been downloaded in more than 20 countries. There's a little reference to click at the bottom of the slide there, which is an interview with Paul Mason and myself about the about the development of PAS 440, which is quite an interesting listen if you've got time. Next one, please. So it's not necessarily a simple ask, particularly for a small company, to demonstrate that it's undertaking responsible innovation. So we felt that we needed to take a lot of account of the competing pressures on time. and as I said, particularly for small companies. If you're working in a fast-moving area and you're only just keeping up with your potential competitors, it can be a bit daunting to be faced with a requirement to take something else on board, particularly if it's something you're not that familiar with, like it may be the case, responsible innovation. And having a guide like this that takes account of these factors is actually very useful. It provides a framework, as we say, to help innovators to work through the demands of innovating in a responsible manner and demonstrating how this has been done. And I'll give you a quick overview of an example later where a company that had been behaving admirably in terms of responsible innovation suddenly had a challenge from an NGO, or actually a bunch of 100 NGOs, about how it was responsibly developing this technology. And because it hadn't thought of telling people, it looked as if they were on the back foot and were making it up as they went along. And that wasn't actually the case, but they didn't have the ability to demonstrate that they'd been doing it. So this is a practical guide. It adds value to the innovation process and helps improve the robustness with which potential problems can be addressed. And it's also realistic, as I said, about the demands on company resources and in competitive environments. There's a reference there to a journal article that describes PAS 440 itself and gives two SME case study examples that were done by two of my master's students a couple of years ago, implementing responsible innovation with small companies, and describes the process, what we went through. Next one, please. This is a fairly unique approach to responsible innovation. There's been intense activity in academic circles on something called responsible research and innovation, RRI, huge amounts of European funding in that area. But within that activity, very, very little on actually helping companies to do it, helping companies to understand why they need to do it, how to do it, and to do it in an affordable and timely way. And this, to my knowledge, is the first standard of this nature that actually takes account of all those factors and it enables companies to do it effectively. I'm aware that there are several private company standards that actually do that kind of thing quite well. So it's not unique in the sense of there's nothing else like it, but it is unique in terms of being a publicly available one. Oh, back again. It recognises that responsible innovation will be different at different stages of innovation. The technology readiness levels, if you're familiar with that terminology, if you're thinking about being responsible at TRL 3 to 4, which is about proof of concept, then you'll be facing a very different situation in terms of knowledge about what your product will look like at the end of the day, what its benefits and hazards might be, how you'll have to change it in order to make it viable as a marketable product. So many things will be uncertain at that point. You do have to keep updating your TRL, and I would say treat it as if it's an integral part of your risk register or something like that. Revisit it on the same time scale as you would your risk register, and you'll find that you would have to make it adaptive and change things as you go along. It thinks about the different capabilities of large and small companies. It includes a framework, and I'll come to that, to demonstrate publicly how it's been implemented. It incorporates the need to be aware of and comply with all relevant regulations and standards, because there will be a whole range of other standards that affect the product you're developing. And it also includes guidelines for stakeholder engagement, covering a variety of circumstances. And you're probably as aware as I am of the constant requirements. If you're unsure about your development of a new technology, people will tell you you must do stakeholder engagement, and we've been doing that for 25 years, and I'm not aware it's made much difference to anything. I think we need different ways of doing stakeholder engagement, and there's good guidance for doing stakeholder engagement in the standard as well. Now move on, please. Thank you. So what will companies gain from responsible innovation? This is just another list, and these are all important factors: long-term cost and risk reductions, more resilient new offerings to potential customers. If you're engaging more with your customers, you'll learn more about what their needs and wants are, and you'll be able to more effectively meet those needs. You'll get improved trust and maintenance, a better social license to operate. You'll have improved relations with investors and greater investor confidence in yourself, greater attractiveness as an employer. A lot of employees, in fact, probably the best employees you could have, are very interested in the degree of responsibility shown by the companies that are employing them. We've seen that lately with some of the media companies. You'll have better supply chain relationships with your partner companies, an improved reputation and brand value, increased innovation capabilities, improved stability to communicate the value of products and services because you'll know better what your customers and your market wants to see. This is all something that you might be doing anyway in another context, but undertaking it as part of responsible innovation will give you greater insights and you'll be able to use them more creatively than you might otherwise. And you'll have better relationships with governments, regulators and local communities, and that can be very important for a company as well. So moving on. So there's two main elements of responsible innovation. The first one is company level responsibility. So the difference between these two is that there are some things which all companies will be doing anyway, and they are definitely elements of responsibility, but they don't cover the whole area of responsibility. These are things like respect for the rule of law, respect for international norms of behaviour, human rights, ethical behaviour, accountability for your impacts on society, the economy, and the environment, and transparency in decisions that impact on society and the environment. All of these things are things which any company should be doing, innovating or not. They should all be behaving in this way. But if you are trying to claim responsibility in your innovation system, you will very definitely need to be able to demonstrate that those criteria are covered. So it applies to all companies. One of the standards is the social responsibility standard, ISO 26000, that a lot of you are probably familiar with, and that's the one I've given an example of here, but there are others as well. And then there are additional factors that are not related to the company's overall behaviour, but they're much more innovation specific, and that's on the next slide. So these innovation specific standards are the applying to technologies that are transformative or disruptive or likely to become a focus of attention in other ways. So they may not be particularly transformative, but if it's something that the public decides to take an interest in, or not the general members of the public, but particularly certain NGOs that see themselves as trying to drive up standards of behaviour around particular technology developments and so on, and can make life very uncomfortable for companies if they believe that you are not behaving in the way that you ought to behave in terms of responsibility. So it's the areas that are likely to be of interest in this context are things like ability to deliver on net zero and biodiversity commitments, to improve healthcare, to create controversy, for example, onshore wind farms, hydrogen-related hydrogen-fueled vessels, driverless cars, using drones to deliver parcels. One that came up fairly recently was a television programme about the Drax power station challenging its environmental credentials because it had been found to be using wood from a virgin mature forest in America or Canada. And they had a television programme from the BBC about this process, and it must have been quite uncomfortable listening and watching for them. Another area that sometimes gets attention is using genetic technologies to manufacture chemical feedstocks, and I've got an example about that in a minute or two. But this on the right of this diagram, you have the responsible innovation framework that has been you put in the PAS 440 as a template that you could use to monitor for yourself your conformance with a responsible innovation standard, and you can use it to demonstrate this responsibility, demonstrate all the things you've thought about, and what you've done about them, how you've consulted, where you've got your information, and so on. And you fill in these boxes on the right, and so on. I'm involved at the moment with a project for it's actually an Innovate UK funded project where we're using this framework on the company's innovation, and working through it, we're finding that it quite quickly becomes a very long table indeed. So you're looking at societal elements, benefits and risks, environmental elements, benefits and risks, health-related elements, benefits and risks, value chain elements, how the companies that you're collaborating with might or might not be innovating responsibly, and then any regulatory elements that might apply to your product. And once you start filling in this table and filling all the columns and so on, how you've taken action, how you've identified the specific issue, it gets quite long and complicated. And what we're working on in this research project that we've got at the moment are diagrammatic ways of demonstrating what's in this table that will make it much more easy to digest for somebody who doesn't fully understand the process, and make it easier to communicate to a public audience, for example. So one of the things we've found trying to implement PAS 440 is that this is a bit unwieldy, and we're trying to develop ways to improve it and so on. But it is a way of capturing everything you need to do and everything you need to know, and it will vary from one product or one innovation to another. Not all will have health related elements, so you may not need to use those rows. Some may not have value chain elements if it's only one company involved, and so on. So you can see how it can be simpler for individual projects. Next one, please. So optimizing its implementation. You should treat it as a living document. It's to be updated and adapted as circumstances change. As I said, include the benefits and risks of all the elements likely to be of interest. Include regulatory compliance. Consider whether and how business partners are also committed to responsible innovation. You may be behaving perfectly responsibly, but if there's another company who has to take over and manage or develop the product between you and the market, then it might fail at that point and your efforts would be wasted. You need to find out who are the relevant stakeholders for your company and what they think about the product. And we do include some advice and guidance from for small companies and those who are lacking in time and resources, for ways to do that don't necessarily involve a lot of delays and endless searching and so on. And I think at the end, once you get used to it, it'll become a fairly routine element of the company's risk register. So it's also got these other aspects, advice on horizon scanning to find stakeholders, how to assess stakeholder perceptions, being ready with well-prepared evidence based answers if stakeholders begin to ask questions, and dealing with the complexity of developing it and explaining its outcomes. I'm hoping it's going to be very much more widely used in future and become a regular part of the processes of innovating companies. The next slide, I think I've taken up enough time with this, but if you just move on to the next slide. Yes, this is two reports that you can look at. I've written in the title, "What could possibly go wrong?" This was an event a few years ago where a company called Ecover, who manufacture environmentally sustainable detergents, felt that their use of palm oil to develop these detergents was not as sustainable as it could be. And they wanted to use synthetic biology to collaborate with a company called Solazyme to manufacture these raw materials for the starting point for their detergents using algae in fermenters. And they were challenged by a group of about 100 NGOs who wrote a letter to the New York Times directed to Ecover saying, if you do this, we'll put you out of business. They were anti-GM activists, and they thought that using synthetic biology to manufacture your detergents was definitely not sustainable. And the result was that Solazyme went out of business at the end of the day. It's quite a long story, but what you've got on the left is the link to an NGO explanation of why it was legitimate to make this challenge to Ecover. And on the right, you've got a more evidence-based analysis of what went on and what went wrong from the Rathenau Institute in the Netherlands, which is a much more balanced account of the whole process. And it just brings it to your attention, you might think you're doing everything wonderfully well, and of course it's environmentally sustainable, etc. And if you don't dig hard enough and find the possible tipping points in the other direction, then it can be very damaging, particularly for a small company or a large one like Ecover. Ecover was eventually taken over by Unilever, but I don't know if there was any relationship there. Thank you. And over to Victoria.
Well, do we have any questions for Joyce at this time? Well, while you're thinking about it, one of the things that struck me was that with both the ISO 56000 as well as PAS 440, all of them are really asking people to think. It's asking you to consider all of these aspects, and so that you don't get caught out like Ecover did, But I think that that what is also handy is having a way to have this as diagrams. You touched on that briefly, that you're working on that at the moment, and I think that that's critical. We're finding that the same with the innovation management system standards, that there are some case studies. Enterprise Ireland have developed a really good model based on 56002, which just simplifies it down. It's a little house, and they've got a great diagrammatical way of talking about all of the different aspects. So I think that's an area where both standards, I think many standards could improve with the quality of their diagrams, but that's a process all in and of itself. Ashreen, I see you have a question.
Hi there. Yeah, I just wanted to ask if the issue of inclusive innovation is no longer an issue. So have businesses moved away from innovating in relation to reference man as the model, or is it not a problem enough for us to be highlighting that in the standard?
You're talking about the PAS 440?
Yeah, so the common things where seatbelts, for example, were designed for the male body and not the female body, so they actually pose a risk to pregnant women, for example, and equally with tests for heart disease not being kind of adapted for the female body, and in so forth. Like innovators that have developed those tests have kind of put women at risk. And yes, I was just wondering if if that featured in the design of the framework, or if it was something that maybe is, you know, we've progressed as an innovation society and we are now thinking more holistically in that sense. Or yeah, I was just trying to.
Yeah, I take your point now. Yeah, it's something that would definitely apply for some innovations, but not others. So it wouldn't necessarily be appropriate to put it into PAS 440 unless as an example of something to consider. And we didn't actually do that when we were writing it, but it's something that you would definitely be expected to be thinking about.
Yeah.
And if you had done your searching of concerns, searching for concerns on websites or other things like that, or actually talking to potential customers and consumers, if you'd done that according to what's recommended in PAS 440, you should have come up with that particular point as an issue to be considered in your product. So it's a very good example of the kind of thing that would come up if you were doing what we're suggesting. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Lovely. Also, Abrar had a question. So does responsible innovation extend to how the product will be manufactured, including the selected manufacturers?
Yes, absolutely, and that's rather a good example of a value chain, and the need for the whole value chain. You will find that one of the areas I work in quite a lot is industrial biotechnology, where you probably have an SME taking something to proof of concept stage or just beyond, and after that it will be handed over to a manufacturer to do the scale up. And then the manufacturer might make a molecule that's useful, say, for developing perfumes or detergents, and that will then be handed on to the formulator, and the business to consumer end is the formulator at the end of the day who's making the detergents or the perfumes. So there's a value chain there with at least 3 different staging points in it. And each of the companies in that value chain should be expected to be demonstrating responsible innovation for their contribution to the end product. And if one of them should turn out not to be compliant with responsible innovation in some way, then that's going to be very damaging for the other companies who are spending time and effort and money to get this product through to a market at the end of the day. So that nicely illustrates the need for the whole value chain to be involved.
Lovely. It reminds me a lot of you know, that we're in this time of VUCA, you know, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, and more of these types of you know, black swan events and things like that. And I think, you know, if you're saying, well, why is this important besides the obvious, you know, being responsible beyond the ethics of it, it's actually, this is how you go about creating that resilience within your organization, within your supplier network, by actually going through this process. So, you know, if you have to answer the question, you know, well, why is this important? If they don't see the ethics as a valuable one, well, then critically, how you create that resiliency, you know, with all of this crisis and situation that we face. And in fact, that segues me quite nicely into 56,000, because some of the research that there's been 2 empirical studies that have been done along with others, but actually demonstrates that 56,002 in practice helps to level out those crisis periods. And so you actually see enhanced innovation capability and business productivity and performance, and it helps to create a continuation that isn't as affected by crisis periods. So that's Mir from 2016 and De Silva from 2021. But there's a few other really interesting pieces of academic research that are actually considering whether or not it's helping us to validate, some of this work. Is this actually, worth doing at the end of the day? And I think at this point, I just want to touch on specifically for those who are part of Innovation EDGE, the startups and SMEs that you're working with are high growth. And so they're not necessarily, not considering innovation or have some degree of innovation management. They may be at that stage where they have one great invention, a piece of technology that they've developed, but they're looking to see how they extend that and how they scale that. But quite critically, you're looking after UK businesses, and they're competing on a global stage. Now, when it comes to ISO 56000, the UK is probably about 3 years behind Sweden, Japan, Spain, in fact, with the rollout of 56002 and the promotion of 56002. Now, why this matters is because once 56001 comes out, it makes sense if you are procuring for any length of time or you're procuring internationally, that the companies that you want to deliver for you, the companies that will be your suppliers, will need to be compliant with 56001. Reason being that you want what you buy today to be the most innovative solution, but you want to know that whatever, whether it's infrastructure that they're building for you, whether it's a technology that in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, that it still remains as innovative as it is today. It doesn't date from the day that you buy it. And so 56001 is going to become, and we're already seeing in Japan, as an example, it is one of, it was their highest selling standard for a number of months when it first launched, and it remains in their top category of standards being purchased. That was 56002, that's the guidance. So there is a huge demand already being seen in other markets around this, and they will have organizations that can comply on day one. However, in the UK, we're yet to actually implement anything like that. So whether or not even a high growth startup, whether or not that high growth startup could actually qualify on day one or not, we don't even know. So we do have a bit of catch up to play, and there is a role for Innovation EDGE to do that. And Martin McGurk does sit on the BSI committee for this. So do please reach out to him as well if you have any other questions. I'm happy to also answer questions. But just to help you to understand the relevance of this in what you are doing on a day-to-day basis. But what I'm going to do now is just touch a little bit more on the applicability. Not only, as I've said, is there evidence to show that it is actually improving and enhancing innovation capability in organizations. One of the big things is that it doesn't, you see less waste, as we mentioned earlier. There's a lot of talk around failing and failing fast, but really what it is, and which is a part of the standard, is understanding what your uncertainties are. So what about this particular idea or concept that you have is unknown? How well is it going to sell? How are you going to produce it? You know, what's any aspect to it could sit under your uncertainties. And it's about being able to prioritize those uncertainties and minimize those key uncertainties as part of the process. And by doing that, and having that adaptable structure, by having the right leadership and support and culture, you're able to very quickly work through what can go forward and what should not be taken forward, which means that you very quickly ensure that you have a higher degree of later stage success. So rather have, early stage uncertainties that are minimized so that you can have a late stage success, which means that you have less late stage innovation waste. But another key aspect about this, and we've touched on this, is that language. Having startups that you work with who are looking to scale, who are potentially looking, for mergers, for acquisition, to be able to have a consistent language across startups through to, you heard about Unilever and eCover, startups through to large multinationals, all using and understanding the same terms when it comes to innovation. Just that in and of itself, I think we can all agree, will be a huge asset, because so often that language that these different organizations speak just don't correlate, and where a lot of ambiguity and a lot of misunderstanding can occur. So it does help to create that, but it also helps to create, like I mentioned in the example of Enterprise Ireland, it gives them as an organization the confidence in the startups that they're investing in and that they're supporting through a similar program of support like Innovate UK's EDGE program. So, there are benefits to the standard which go beyond just the organization. Just as Joyce touched on, it really can affect an entire ecosystem, and be able to ensure that you are able to recognize key competencies and to locate those key competencies in other organizations, as well as to be able to hire and recruit and develop the right competencies within your organizations as well. So all of these aspects, sit in relation to how 56,000, the suite of how 56,000 can be used, and its relevance. Now, as we've mentioned already, there is that framework of continuous improvement, plan, do, check, act, which is key to the standard and to the innovation management system itself. We have those principles that you can see on the outer ring there, those principles that govern the innovation management system. And then that process of being able to identify opportunities, create concepts, validate those concepts through that uncertainty minimizing, developing the solutions, and then deploying those solutions so that you actually see that value realization. So it's the full process all the way through. And it does, to the points that were raised, it does require that documentation, that knowledge management, which is a key aspect, and ensuring that you have the right balance between, so what is your innovation intent? Where are you going? What's, what role does it play? And then what is your innovation policy? How much risk should you be taking on? How risky should your innovation activities and strategy even be? Have you had that conversation? How far are we pushing this, and what would be the right level that we should have? All of those key conversations kind of making up then how you approach your strategy and into your policy, as we've mentioned, and into your objectives and goals within your innovation portfolio. How to actually develop an innovation portfolio. And an innovation portfolio is not just the innovation that you might have, we might bring out a red one or a square one going forward, but it's actually what type of innovation. So what are you developing internally? What are you developing through open innovation? What other mechanisms do you have to be able to develop your innovation? How radical, as we've touched on with responsible innovation, how radical is the development of your innovation, and what are you doing within that space versus kind of process innovation or incremental innovation? What's the right mix that you should have as an organization? These are some of those key questions that 56,002 help to probe, help to create a provocation so that you have that conversation. But within that 56,000, there's actually a number of these, and I've got to tell Elaine and Stephen to block their ears right now, but I call them self-help books. But there's a whole sequence of self-help books, effectively. No, they're not, they're guidances. But each one under the key number, which is 56,000, which is innovation management. Each one of these are really fabulous guides that have been written through this expert consultation with multiple rounds of peer review, line by line, to create really what is all of the questions that you should be asking. For example, with 56,003 for innovation partnership. And it's called innovation partnership because it covers everything from, I had the question earlier about open innovation, everything about open innovation, as well as other forms of partnership. So and it's really asking you, well, you know, whether you should even enter into it, identify how you identify and select and evaluate partners, you know, what perceptions of value, what challenges you're going to face, how you manage those partner interactions, all of these key issues, it will prompt you to think about. And that's the beauty of a guidance. It's not telling you you must do these things, but it says you should consider. And we're very careful with the use of words like should and shall in writing standards. Within 56,004, it's innovation management assessment. So how do you even go about assessing your innovation management? You know, why is it beneficial? How do you maximize, you know, your findings? What are the resulting benefits? Well, how do you use this? You know, all of these sorts of things, all of those sorts of questions are covered off in 56,004. 56,005, I had the question about, does it cover IP? Well, there's a whole self-help book on that. They're not quite book length. I must say that now, they're not that long. They are papers, but IP is covered off in detail in 56,005. So, you know, how does it support the process of innovation within your organization? You know, how can it be support you essentially for growth, for competitiveness? How should you apply it? Am I going to be touching on 56,007? Yes, I will. We'll get to that in a moment. But we've got 56,006 beforehand, which is strategic intelligence management. This is about working out, you know, what you don't know. We all know that unknown unknowns, known unknowns, and unknown knowns. I've got them the wrong way around, and known knowns. But what we want to do is, with strategic intelligence, is really understand what it is that you need to know that you don't know. So beginning to recognize what is sitting within your known space and what is in your unknown space, and how you should go about ensuring that you have this knowledge. So strategic intelligence goes beyond knowledge management. It's actually, this is really about discovering what type of knowledge you should have, what type of intelligence, you know, the knowledge required for strategic action. So those are the published books, self-help books, the published guidances under 56,000. 56,007 is not yet published. I believe that you can, and this is where Elaine and Stephen jump in, but I believe that you as EDGE specialists have access to, for free, to be able to read on screen these guidances. So you do have access.
Yeah, so everybody should have access to BSOL, it's called, or British Standards Online Library, where you have a view-only access. And so some standards you have free access to the full standard, but for most of our standards you have access to a view-only, and you can decide on whether you need to purchase the standard or not. But if you have any issues with that, please get in touch with me in the chat, and I will send you my email and I can help you. Thank you.
Thanks, Elaine. So I will be speaking momentarily on 56,007 on kind of where we're at with the development of that. I'm not sure, I didn't see who mentioned that, but I will chat to you a little bit about that. But before we get there, I just wanted to cover off Andrew. Thank you, Andrew. Before that, I just wanted to give you this diagram here, which illustrates all of the sections of 56,002. Like we said earlier, one of the things I personally feel, and I know I'm not alone here, is that the ISO and BSI could do some great work around the way we present standards diagrammatically, but there are some rules and regulations about how we do diagrams, so we are restricted. But this one is quite a good one because you'll see it in 56002, and it really puts, if you have a look at the center, it gives you that sense of, in the middle there, you've got your opportunities moving to your innovation value. And it's moving through that process that we would ordinarily limit a innovation management process to. Often they sit separately within the organization, you know, that it might be a bit of an ivory tower. Maybe they've got nice bean bags and some artificial grass, and that's where, you know, that type of work happens. But what's, I think, is most powerful about 56002 is that it starts with that context of the organization, the external and internal context. It's about culture, it's about collaboration on an organization-wide scale. I almost call it, it's like a gateway standard. I have all the wrong terms for these things, but this is how it's in. But like a gateway drug, take you to the dark side. The ISO 56002 and ISO 56001 really impacts each aspect within the organization. So planning, operations, performance evaluation. I was asked about knowledge management, and there's your knowledge management cycle working in collaboration with that innovation engine in the middle, aligned to leadership, aligned to the context of the organization, and ensuring that, you know, there is that continued support, the right type of resource, the right kind of competencies within it. Now, it is generic, it has to work for everybody, but 56002 is like a cheat sheet. It gives you all of the things that you should be considering, and I would use it as a provocation, as a way to get the businesses that you support as consultants, as EDGE specialists, to think about these things, because it's in thinking about them that they start to incorporate aspects of this in what they do. So I want to just show you where we are in the development. As you can see, here are their full names. ISO and BSI love their acronyms. So these are the names of all of those things that I've just been telling you about. There's the 56002, which is published, that's that guidance, the diagram you've just seen. There's 56003, which is partnerships, that's where your open innovation work is. 56004 is a management assessment, so a little bit more support on how you actually assess what you have. Intellectual property, strategic intelligence, and here we go. I've put it as working title. If you know anything about this one, 56007, that's effectively idea management, but it is broader than that. So they're working on the title, which will likely be opportunities and idea management, and ideas management, because it's beyond just the idea. It's also about how do you go out and identify opportunities, which of course links in with your strategic intelligence. We're also developing 56008, which is innovation operation measurements. So how do you, after that assessment, how do you go from assessment to ongoing operational measurement and metrics? And then within the BSI itself, we are working on the review, and we will be publishing an update to design management systems. And there we're actually taking a focus to look at design-led innovation. So that's very specific to BSI, and that is not an auditable standard. That is simply a guidance, but we're in the development of that at the moment as we work through. And finally, that 56001, that auditable standard, as I mentioned, is likely to be published around Q1 2024. We're in development at the moment. It's going through that peer review, and to give you some idea, in the average review there is well over, but usually somewhere between 500 and 1,000 comments. line by line through the document from all of the countries and the experts that are participating and involved. So, and all of the national standards bodies. So it's quite a process to work through those. So we're going through that at the moment as we refine through to get to that final standard. So I thought I would stop now to see if we've got any questions. We've thrown quite a lot at you so far. So are there any questions about, we can chat a little bit more. I mean, we had about frameworks to be able to track, if you saw in that diagram, very much so that it is all about how you document and how you track your ideation, your ideas, the development, what you're keeping, what you're not keeping, probably even more relevant, being able to track your uncertainties and what you're doing to validate and minimize those uncertainties as you work through. Whose question is that? Sorry, Angelo. Do you want to put your you can speak it if you like, or I have to give it a quick read? It would seem to me.
Okay. So thank you. I think you might have hinted on it earlier, but it seemed to me that capacity within the business and access to be able to fund sort of smarter thinking or standards is kind of the key bottlenecks for small to medium-sized companies that are innovating in one particular area. Maybe it's their first product or that they're bringing to market, for example. So it was really around, in comparison to medium to large organizations that have capacity and more funds to actually review the standard and potentially own it as a system. So it was really what your recommendations might be for the smaller businesses that are sort of working on one product. What best practice to sort of coach these kind of companies might you advise?
Well,
thank you.
That's a really great question. You know, one of the things is just sitting down and rather than capacity and cost, simply having, sometimes they're the founders of that startup, but having them think about these things and actually jot a few things down onto paper. Because if you go through that's what the 56002 especially does, is, you know, consider it. We use the word consider too many times, but you should consider this and this and this. And simply by taking out that time to do that job, really, you know, is going to have huge benefit because you'll actually have thought about it. So you start to consciously be aware of the strategic direction you're taking with regards to your innovation and your innovation management. Do you have a follow-up?
I mean, I can see that for our advisors within the EDGE program, getting access to the standard and maybe perhaps working with clients over this diagram, as you say, to hint and suggest they should be thinking about these things might be a helpful thing. So thank you.
One of the other aspects is that it also shows you very quickly where their weakness is. Because if you're talking to a small business and they've got a lot of answers, but there's a specific area where they're like, we haven't really thought about that. I always find they go, that's a good question. Then you know you're looking at an area where there's a gap. But what's great about this is it's kind of giving you the environment of innovation management. And when you go through it with them, you know, you then see where the gaps are, where you're going to be of more use to them. You know, so you can actually go, okay, well, let's start to think about how, you know, recruitment in a small business is so critical. And, you know, if you're only hiring 2 or 3 individuals or maybe 10 individuals, knowing what innovation competencies you need are critical. And it might be that you don't need people who are great creative thinkers. You actually need process promoters, people who are going to help you to get from that point where you're beginning to validate that concept through to that value realization. You know, but if you don't have a sense as a small business of the competencies with regards to innovation management, and you haven't actually considered that your current workforce all sit in that front end because, you know, you're a great shiny new startup and you're doing lots of creative things, and you don't actually have enough of that delivery competency when it comes to your innovation management, that's that piece that you start to look at. So that's just an example there. Do we have another question? I think we do.
Hi, yes, can I jump in?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, so I'm Richard I'm an advisor with Innovate EDGE, like many colleagues here. Just a couple of practical questions. Even with its pre-revenue businesses, great technology run by academics, maybe they just don't. One of the issues we have, whatever work we're doing, is time. And even working with more established businesses as a business coach, that's often the issue as well. So I'm just trying to frame this from a practical point of view, because I can see the value as a structure, as a diagnostic tool, really, really good. But when they're running around panicking, their fundraising isn't going very well, and they may not be able to pay themselves next week, or they're doing application forms which take forever, or working on the product. What's a practical way of, I mean, I've got established innovation business where I can see it would work much more easily because they've got the resources perhaps to do it. I've done 9001 rather, a couple of times, and it's a major time commitment. So my questions are, what is the time commitment we're talking about here? What's the cost? How do we bring it in as a priority when they're in crisis management mode?
Well, one of the, they've probably got more important things if they're in true crisis. But I think it's one of those things where if they're answering these questions, they're answering the questions that investors are going to have, if they're any good, that the investors are going to have, and more so what Innovate UK, what governments, what grant bodies are going to be asking. So if you're not answering these questions now, going through this process and having these answers, you're not going to have the answers when it comes to the crunch time of getting that investment or getting that funding secured. So I would say, ideally, have a little bit of time, even if it's on a Saturday morning, get that founder to read some of this, in his quiet time, or maybe just, tie him to a desk chair and put it in front of him. But the answers to these questions are guaranteed within the next, I would say, 12 to 18 months, just as we've seen, I've told you about Enterprise Ireland, but we're seeing it in Japan. We're seeing requests from South Korea about this. We're seeing, what the US is doing, what Canada are doing, already across the board. Whether you're getting funding locally or internationally, we're going to see it here as well. These requirements will be within the grant funding or within venture capital funding as well. So you might as well start to do this now before it becomes panic stations, would be my advice.
Okay, that's helpful. But what's the cost? What's the commitment? I still need to have some ideas so we can get the expectations rightly balanced with our clients.
Elaine, I'm leaving that one to you.
The cost of implementing the standard, I don't think I could answer that question. But are you talking about the specific costs of the standard?
Well, I know with like 9,000, it's several £1,000s because you have to pay the consultants and the licensing body at UCAS and the rest of it. So I assume there is a cost. And then again, 9,002, it might be 50-man days for someone to do it within a business. So just that type of resource question.
Yeah, it's kind of how long is a piece of string? I mean, it depends on whether the company is implementing it itself as a self standardization protocol within their business. Then it's the man hours it takes to implement the standard, which I couldn't answer. If the standard is a specification standard which is certifiable, then there would be an additional cost for that because you have an auditing team coming in to audit the work. So there would be consultancy fees and auditing fees around that. But couldn't answer that question. Sorry that I can't be more specific. It depends on the standard. It depends on how far down the road you are in implementing the standard. But it's you weigh up the pros and cons in any of these things for quality management, for innovation management. It's what's the cost of not doing it, as well as not of the actual cost of doing it. Sorry, I don't have a specific answer for your question.
Yeah, but just to clarify, if you want a copy, so the PAS 440 is free to download, and all of these 56,002, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are free for you to look at on that library, online library. If you also, there's the UNIDO believe that 56,002 is so important that they actually developed this handbook along with ISO. I think it's about 37. It's not the full version, but it's a really nice handbook. That's about 37 Swiss francs. You know, if you want something like that, I think you might as well just go straight to look at the one that BSI's got, because it's free, and it's that handbook is based on what's there already. It'll only start to cost money in 2024. So right now we don't have, 56,001. It isn't certifiable. It's not going to cost you anything unless you decide to go and use. Spain have already set up a certifiable one. There's a couple of others outside in the world where you could go through a different operator. But to be honest, it's not relevant right now to go with one of those. It would be better to wait until it has actually BS 56,001 is published. Sorry, Lane. Yes.
Thank you, Victoria. We have a few more questions in the chat. There's one from Andrew Smith asking about how companies can get a more personalized advice on the implementation of innovation management. So I'm a business development manager with BSI, and I was involved in the development of this program work with Innovate UK EDGE. So the idea behind the whole program is to get more SMEs involved in the development and using standards. So this program is kind of a first port of call for getting that more personalized advice. So after each of these training sessions, we were to have a 30-minute open surgery where organizations could send through their questions to Victoria and Joyce to get specific answers to any questions that have arisen. There is opportunity to do that for the next few courses. So we have another 3 courses in innovation management to run. If you have any organizations that do have any burning questions, please get in touch and we can put them in those surgery sessions. This is just kind of an exploratory for next year. We're hoping to have like that, a more personalized, tailored program directly for SMEs to get involved in standards and understanding standards and how to implement them. And we can have, answers to those questions about how much it actually costs to implement these kinds of standards and what kind of auditing you need to do for these kind of standards. So there is that opportunity. Please do get in touch if you have any specific questions, and I'll put my email in the chat. But Victoria, over to you. There's a few more questions that have popped up in the chat that you might want to answer.
If I can just respond to
Lovely.
that. We are an SME. So
Okay.
I've just finished a KTP program, so I'm well aware of the work that Innovate UK are doing. My KTP spun off a lot of other innovations which the company are pursuing. We've been involved with EDGE a little bit before, not to yeah, we've met them before, and we've been looking at commercial innovation management packages and training. And to my shame, I think the British standards to me they're not visible things. You can't see them unless you pay money for them, and you don't know whether you want to pay money for them unless you can see them. So I didn't even think that there would be a standard. So I'm now interested in this. But if you're talking about and unlike I think the majority of people on this, I'm not coming from I'm not going to take it in this information and then work with other companies to see if they're doing that. I work in the company that wanted to do that, and in September, you know, I was asked, right, this company needs an innovation management system. Can you put one together for Christmas? I think the company have no idea how big the scale of the culture change that would be required for that, and the standard is kind of starting to help me understand ways of communicating that. But I'd like to be involved in, if there's review or ways that we can be involved in the unfolding of this, then that would be brilliant.
Well, that's lovely. There are two ways immediately. We are looking for case studies, UK case studies. So we could potentially use you as a case study.
We're halfway down the road already. Yeah.
Wonderful. And the other aspect is that, you know, the BSI technical committee, who is responsible, and then we appoint members of that committee to then work within the ISO and to develop this. We are always looking for other members. So I'm going to plug. You know, it is a voluntary committee to be a part of, but if you apply, and you do have to apply with your CV and all of that sort of thing, we do make sure that we have the full competency suite. But if you do apply, it would be absolutely fabulous to have you as part of the committee, who are responsible for advising and reviewing the standards that are being developed and that sort of thing. There is that opportunity, and this is open to everybody on this call, particularly if you are a practitioner and you have some expertise. I do also just want to say we have run over. I was just going to ask you to pop in something in the chat, but we've got lots of lovely questions happening already. We were just going to give you some broad brushstrokes, next steps, but effectively we have finished the main part of the presentation. For those who need to drop off, you know, I'm sorry we ran over by a few minutes, but I think this is when it gets exciting, when we've got lots of questions. So we're going to stop sharing the presentation now and continue with some of the other questions that we've got in the chat. And you're all welcome to stay on as long as you like. There you go. You should all be able to see one another now. Those of us who are on screen. Lovely. So we did have, so I hope that answered your question, Andrew. And yes, you're going to see more and more, this market is going to start to heat up. We're going to see more and more consultancies and auditing firms and those sorts of organizations beginning to present themselves with training and support around these standards. You know, that's how these markets mature. I'll just point out, there is ISPIM, for those of you who don't know, which is I'm going to get it wrong, but the International Society of Professional Innovation Management, or something along those lines. That's one of the bodies. There's also the US equivalent. So there are two not-for-profit membership bodies for innovation management, which I would also recommend that you have a look at, because anything interesting that's coming about that's actually going to be informing which other additional you know, self-help books under 56,000, those guidances generally tend to come from some of those forums and those discussions. Just between us, PAS 440 is in the development of standards at the early stage. We have the opportunity for its review to come up, and then to potentially promote it to a British standard, and then from there to also potentially take it all the way through to 56,000. I'm not saying that will happen, but I'm saying that there is the potential there if we follow all the protocols and processes. So we might actually see that topics like responsible innovation become part of that full suite of 56,000. I would personally love to see that. I think Joyce is the same. You know, because it is so critical. And when it gets to that stage, to Ashreen's point earlier, the scope can become broader, because as a PAS 440, it has a narrower scope, but as it evolves and is developed into a full standard, you know, we can then widen out that scope potentially. So there's a lot of exciting work that can be done there too. But I've lost track of where we are in the questions, so it might be easiest if you just ask your questions, if you're happy to ask them. Just on Barbara's question, I'll just answer that one because I found that one. One of the key things, and we have a number of working groups within the technical committee that is responsible for 56,000 and all of the documents underneath. But we're specifically looking at making sure that it's accessible. It's accessible both, you know, from a business size perspective, but also geographically. So we're really trying to change the way that some of those other standards, large standards in the past, you know, were developed and how they were developed. We're looking to make it as accessible as possible. You know, it's always that challenge, though, to do something well. Just as we spoke about earlier, you need to take, you know, do your due diligence, spend your time on it, have a focus on it, potentially put resource behind it. And that's always the challenge of, you know, we must ensure that organizations are able to do this well. So there are going to be certain requirements or constraints around what does actually have to be done. Because if it's too simplistic, it's not going to be successful. But we are taking that into account. And we have fantastic personas. You should see the work. They all, you know, fantastic names of you know, startup Stuart and people like that who we all talk about in the meetings. Next question. Who have we got? Abra.
Yeah. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
That was brilliant. Thank you very much. Very much enjoyed that. And Joyce, I loved your example. I come from a background of biochemical engineering and fermentation, and I worked with algae in the past, and biofuels. So that's great. But yeah, a number of things I wanted to just very quickly ask. It seems that what you're proposing here is not just standards, but some form of innovation strategy that. You know, our clients or SMEs can use. There's different ways I've seen different types of innovation strategies spring up, but yours is not dissimilar to other innovation strategies. I did have a couple of other points. One is about risk. I like to see risk in there because everything you're saying about responsible innovation is really what's the risk in X, Y, or Z, but that isn't actually brought out in the diagram. Because in an innovation management, one could argue also is about it's okay to take risks, and you have to take risks if it's highly disruptive innovation, but that risk should be managed. So, you know, great to see if that would be borne out. The other thing is really interesting about grants, and I would have thought a good way to test this out first is something like SBRI, okay, which is more like a tender. And the other thing, how this could fit in, I mean, how does this align with some kind of analysis which you have to do for wider impacts as part of a grant application, something like PESTLE, for example? How does it align with that? And the only other thing I had in mind was when I saw your diagram was it's quite linear. But these days, of course, you know, it tends to be a combination of both linear and iterative as well. I think you mentioned agile. Above, and I think I've got other things, but I think I'll stop it there.
Well, on that last one, it definitely is iterative, and we do speak about that, and many debates on as to how do we best show this, you know, without it looking like a specific linear process. You know, so there's been that is a key aspect to it. We do talk about risks, but recognizing the difference between risks and uncertainties, and understanding, you know, understanding the difference and then how you go about addressing those. So that is covered off within the approach, and overall, yes, this is about strategy. because innovation, is very much at the heart of what ISO is about, and even BSI, but it's part of the vision and mission of ISO, and it's very much believed that that's the requirement of standards, is to be a strategic tool. And so seeing that relationship between innovation and strategy within the document, is critical. I think would struggle to see it another way, which is interesting. I mean, I haven't actually thought about that.
Can I come in on the risk question? Because I agree with most innovative technologies. There are very few nowadays where you will not be questioned about public health risks, environmental risks, but there will always be the financial risks, of course, that you have to pay account of, and most companies will have a risk register as part of their general company management. I'd be really surprised if they don't, but maybe that's something that ought to be in innovation management. If it's not there already, there ought to be 5,000 and something guidance on managing risk, and I think we did put a pointer in the PAS 440 that you need to pay attention to the regulatory systems that will be in place for any technology that you might come up with. And what happens nowadays on several occasions that I've been involved with is that nobody can quite decide which regulatory system a particular technology should be allocated to. And so you end up with serious anomalies like GM cows in America are regulated as if they were drugs. And, that's clearly not sensible, but it was what the regulators came up with when they were asked to make a decision. So there are lots of occasions now where the regulatory system is actually a big problem, particularly for a radical innovation. And I just wanted to mention the new body that's now in existence that I'm actually a member of, which is called the Regulatory Horizons Council. And if a company or an agency that's involved with innovative companies gets in touch with the Regulatory Horizons Council and points to an area where such a regulatory inhibition is causing problems, then the Regulatory Horizons Council can take it up and do a study and put a report that will go to government to say, here's how you need to fix this regulatory system to make it more amenable for innovative technologies to get through to a marketplace. So the government in the UK is doing something about this, and it's really important that as many companies as possible and other organisations like EDGE are aware of it and are willing to use it to influence the government to change the regulatory systems where necessary. And very often what we suggest when we suggest changes is that you really don't need a legally based regulatory system for this. A standard would do just as well and could be developed faster and with greater consensus and in a more societally acceptable way.
We did also have a point from James Lloyd, actually, that recognising that diagram used as a template for city innovation at Bristol City Council strategy, which is fabulous news. We are always looking for UK case studies at the moment, in particular around where 56,000 is being used. So James, I think you may still be on the call, I'm not sure, but we would be very interested to know about how it's being used, because
I'm still on the call. Hi, Victoria.
Okay, hi.
Yeah, so it's just an observation. I recognise the diagram. So that was 2 years ago, if I'm honest. So as part of the City Innovation team. So this is kind of high level stuff at the council. So in terms of the City Innovation team, the council, smart city, etc. Just recognise the template. So senior managers have used that in terms of getting structure to what we were doing at the time. So so that's kind of made it real today. To see that that's made it real.
Well, the thing, I mean, that's, you know, that's fabulous to hear, because this again goes back to that language. You know, if you know, Bristol City Council are using it and they're putting out applications, and you know, companies want to apply, being able to reference that same innovation language and being able to fit into that process, you know, is critical. Then we start to see it on that, you know, that ecosystem level, which is great.
I was just thinking ecosystem. So my manager at the time now works for WECA, so West of England Combined Authority on the digital side. So she would have been very much centre ground in terms of designing the city innovation strategy at Bristol City Council. Her experience is BAE Systems.
Yeah.
So you know, that there's a read across, and that's what we're saying, isn't it? There's a, within the innovation ecosystem, we're all sharing and imparting knowledge between us. So just to see that was great, and really good presentation as well today. So thanks for all the information. In terms of Innovate Edge, I think we can drive that forward with our businesses.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. Well, thank you for that. But might follow up, if we can, on that case study, because we're looking for validation, and on a global level, we need to ensure that, you know, we've got the I think it's by 2035 we want the UK to be an innovation hub, a global innovation hub, and key to it is this standard, and you know, being and having it, you know, as part of our infrastructure, as part of our public sector, you know, and across the board. And so we're looking for case studies, and unfortunately I have very few that I can share internationally, so I don't want to be sitting in the back row. I often have to, you know, call in the Swedish.
If it helps, the city innovation strategy that was designed at the Times in the public domain, that'll still be there.
Oh, great.
So it's literally called Bristol City Council City Innovation. So I think there's still a team there. So yeah, things move on, don't they? But yeah. So that's in the public domain. That sits within the broader strategy, which is called the One City Plan, which is has a number of ambitions within it. Hundreds of ambitions, actually. And that's obviously Marvin Rees, the mayor of Bristol City Council. So yeah, Bristol being, you know, a major UK city, amongst other cities, Belfast, etc., you know, Newcastle, Manchester, you know, the cities look at each other in terms of, you know, city innovation. So that thinking hasn't gone away. I was involved with Innovate UK as well in terms of domestic missions programme. So the interconnect between Innovate UK, central and public authorities and small businesses. So, you know, the ecosystem in that context across services, if that makes sense. So you know, so the Career, obviously when Career then does a global business innovation program, you know, some of us are already cited in terms of what a smart city is about, electric vehicles, etc., 5G connectivity, etc. So there's a lot there, isn't there? And I guess one of the challenges is to get our SME businesses to connect into that bigger ecosystem. Bristol City Council does that very well historically, and I know other local authorities do it really well. But there's bigger connections there, and I guess with Innovate UK EDGE and public authorities, civil service, and yourselves, that could be quite inspiring going forward, because we've got a number of challenges at the moment, obviously. Environmental, sustainability, etc. You know, cost of living crisis. So yeah, just thinking at that strategic level. So today's been really good for that.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, it is one of those there's only a few of you left, so I can say this, that one of the big issues that we have is it's not the companies that yourselves, the edge specialists, are handling. It's our productivity long tail. It's, you know, the 80% of SMEs who aren't growing, and the research is saying that it's the failure to take up new management practices, and specifically around new technologies, you know, that prevents new technologies being taken up, new innovations. And this standard really does offer that opportunity, that gateway to start to get those practices, to change that practice, to change the mindset, to change the culture. But our problem, if we don't use it as an advantage, is going to be a huge disadvantage for us, because other countries are 3 years ahead of us with regards to kind of rolling this out, with getting the government, all the government aspects involved, to get with the promotion of it. You're hearing about it perhaps for the first time today, some of you, you know, and the thing is, we're not doing enough. Because we've got to get to the point where we actually have that army of small businesses who can step forward in 2024 and be certified. At the moment, the majority won't even be able to reach that level. So we do have, it's a fantastic opportunity, but it's also, there are some serious risks that we face if we don't start to address how we get more companies taking up innovation management systems and the practice of those, you know, for the country. So that's part of the reason why I'm so involved and passionate about this. I think it's key to the economy going forward.
Well, Victoria, I've really enjoyed it today, and I think what you've said there is right. From what I've heard, you've got a great approach, haven't you? But it's how to deploy it at scale into the SME community. And if some of these standards, you don't, it's hard to get at them. The whole thing has to be very visible. It has to be easy to use. You know, for Innovate UK as an example, all the advisors have to have enough confidence and experience to be able to talk to their customers about it. They have to know where to find it. So, you know, you really are into the deployment phase, which isn't easy, but, you know, that's where obviously the attention is required if this is going to be more than a secret, a best kept secret. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we heard earlier from Andrew, who's dropped off, but Andrew saying, you know, this, I was told to put in an innovation management system, and now I'm just hearing about this today, when in fact he should have immediately been able to say, oh, you know, this, I know what we should do, 56,002. But we'll get there. We'll get there. Hopefully now you've all heard about it. You're all fired up, and we'll get you spreading the good word. Become evangelical about standards. I don't know what happened to me. I was a normal person once, and then got involved in standards. Joyce is the same.
Yes.
Perhaps you can just think what links or information you can get to everybody on the call to help with that dissemination of information. Because certainly I would struggle to know where to go other than Googling things, you know. If you can make that easy, that will help.
Thank Paul. I'll just step in there on this one. So after this session, myself and Stephen and Flora will send out communications to everybody who joined. And as part of the program, we have a central website where we put a lot of this kind of information, and we have a knowledge team that help organizations with specific questions that they have about standards. So we'll point you guys to all of that information in our follow-up communications, and make sure that's communicated to the wider Innovate UK EDGE specialists as well.
Right, thank you.
Nice.
Lovely. All right. Well, I think we should start wrapping up now. But if, like we said, if there are any more questions and that sort of thing, send them through, and everything's going to be shared with you. So, but I'm glad, and also speak to Martin McGurk. Those of you who are Innovate EDGE people, you'll know him. So he's involved on the BSI committee as well. So you can have a chat with him too.
Thank you very much.
All righty, guys. Well,
Thank you.
I'm going to be off. And please also spread the word about the other 3 events like this that we have, sessions that we have like this too. I think we'll just put that in the email as well to everybody, so that they can spread the word to attend Fridays and next week's.
Thanks all. Thank you
very much.
Bye bye.
Bye.